is 12 and 10% of the generation. Renewable was 22%, 23% of the installed capacity, but in terms of generation was 9%. Now, if you look at the switch that is being discussed, and that is why the coal issue has to be understood in this context, that India by 2030 has not said it's getting rid of coal. It is simply said, and if you look at the numbers, these are very ambitious numbers. We have been growing coal at a very high rate till now. And what we are kind of saying that if this is the energy plan going forward, then coal is where it is. Okay? Because if you look at the installed capacity, it is going to go up from 228 gigawatts to 282 gigawatts. Now, if you look at the current coal-based plants which are being set up, that's roughly the capacity. So we are saying, without saying it, that we are not growing coal further. What we are saying is that we are growing in the renewable space, because the future energy, because India will grow, and if you look at the bottom, you will see in terms of the generation, we will be doubling from, but the doubling is going to happen in the renewable space. That Madam will do. I am too. No, once this goes.
Oh, that one. All right. Okay.
So if you look at this, this is kind of, this seems to us that this is now, it's not been officially stated, I have to say. Nobody has said to us that in Glasgow, when the Prime Minister made the speech, this was the basis of his speech, okay? But this is the only document we have from a very respected government institution, which will tell us that, and in fact, Mr. Batra is here, who was a part of this institution and probably very much part of setting this up and writing this up. So you can probably pick his brains on, you know, what they thought and what they believed when they did this. But what they're simply, this chart gives you, in a sense, what the energy future could be in the country. Stagnant coal, increase in renewable. That's the bottom line, with a doubling of the energy generation in billion units, because obviously India's energy needs have to grow. We are in a very energy poor country, we have to increase. Now, there are many issues which we will discuss today in doing this, but there are two bottom lines here. Coal is not going and renewable is increasing. So which means both issues have to be discussed. What will happen to the coal that remains, and what will happen and will happen, will renewable grow at the pace that is required? So those are our two fundamental questions which we will try and discuss in this session. If you look at the same chart in terms of a pie diagram, I like pie diagrams. So I asked my colleagues to put this in a pie because I like the way it comes out. I mean, essentially, what it tells you is that coal and gas, 80%, 78, 80%, down to 55, okay? But the big one that will increase is renewable from 9.2 to 32. Strangely enough, hydel actually goes down, and nuclear, which I keep always saying, has such high, I mean, I'm not in favor of nuclear, but I do believe that nuclear has the highest land. It has a minister reporting to the prime minister. I mean, we need to understand why, you know, is that the only capacity that in nuclear, why can't we expand nuclear? But that's not my issue. Frankly, we don't discuss nuclear. It's not our problem. But for us, the coal issue and the hydel issue and the renewable issue. So now I want to, therefore, this session is to discuss coal and renewable. For coal, I'm going to ask my colleague Nivit to come here and to give us a presentation on CSC's work on coal. We have been doing a lot of work on coal-based thermal power plants. What are the issues that we see and why are we so angry about it? Let him explain to you, and then I will ask Aditya for his renewable, and then move on.
Thank you, madam. My name is Nivit Kumar Yadav. I am Program Director, Industrial Pollution Unit, Center for Science and Environment. Thank you. Last week, I went to Sunita ji's cabin to ask, so many big people are coming, reputed journalists are coming. Please tell me, what should I present? Then she took more than 1 hour to explain the Mahabharata of coal-based thermal power plant in India. And after she finished, she asked me, Nivit, I am giving you 7 to 10 minutes to finish your presentation. So I will try to stick with the time. Sunita ji has already shared the first 2 slides, but again I want to emphasize, when we are talking about coal-based thermal power plant, let's be very clear, they are not going anywhere. Though the growth is very slow or stagnant, from 228 to 282 gigawatt in 2030, but dirty coal-based power plant are going to be the part of our energy supply in next 10 to 20 years. Sunita ji has already said this also, but with some numbers. Yesterday, somebody from Jharkhand said, coal mines are getting closed in Jharkhand. But the fact is different. This is the data only for thermal power plant. 200 million ton increase is going to increase in next 10 years. But what about iron and steel plant? What about cement plant, fertilizer, aluminium? What about thousands of brick kilns, foundry sector in the country? They are also coal consuming. So coal is not disappearing in next 10 to 20 years. 10 years. So what is the need of the hour? Need of the hour is decarbonization. We have to ensure whatever power we get from coal in future is clean. If we reduce our coal consumption, it has co-benefit agenda. First is greenhouse gas emission and second is local air pollution. If you look at the source apportionment study of different cities in the country, you will find wherever thermal power plant is there, the percentage of PM SOx NOx from thermal power plant is much, much higher than any other source. Now let's come to what is the problem with the sector. If you look at the air pollution part, thermal power plant plus industry, if you combine 45% of the SOx emission, 30% of the NOx emission, and 80% of the mercury emission is from this sector. When you combine thermal power plant and industry. Next is water. A rough data shows this sector uses something around 24 billion meter cube of fresh water. This is something like half of the fresh water which India uses. And another important thing to note is many of the plants are located in water stressed area like Nagpur, Raichur, Korba and West Midnapur. When it comes to waste, after solid waste, fly ash is the second largest waste stream in the country, which comes from coal-based thermal power plant. Now, when you talk about clean thermal power plant, and you look at the factual status, the answer is non-compliance. In 2015, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change came up with a very stringent norms for thermal power plant. For the first time, they introduced SOx and NOx standard. They also introduced specific water consumption and mercury emission in the 2015 notification. 2-year deadline was given from 2015 to 2017. But because of resistance from the power company, matter went into the court, and in 2018, Supreme Court extended the deadline to 2022. What is the current status? I don't have the past figure, but every year some improvement is having. But situation is very grim. Look at the particulate matter. Very easy to manage, but still 2/3 of the power plant are only meeting the particulate matter standard. We have done the study for Rajasthan thermal power plant last year, and we found even the newer plant are not able to meet the thermal power plant standard. I will come to the top later. Oxides of nitrogen. Earlier, the standard was strict, but I think 2 years back, the ministry again diluted the standard. Now you can say more or less companies, thermal power plant may be able to meet the new NOx standard. However, there is no data in the public domain to support the same. When it comes to the water and mercury, environmental regulators are silent. CSE has conducted a study last year regarding on water uses in the country, and we found 1 out of 2 plants are non-compliant. Means 50% of the thermal power plant are non-compliant when it comes to specific water consumption. And nobody in the country have done any work on mercury emission from thermal power plant, though the standard have come in 2015. Let's come to the SOx. Lot of debate is going around in the country regarding implementation of equipment to control SOx. The standard came in 2015, industry registered. What is the situation right now? Well, Supreme Court said 2022. So if we consider 2022 as the deadline, 93% of the thermal power plant are not going to meet the SOx norm by 2022. So this is the current situation right now. But last year in 2021, when we were doing meeting with the regulator, trying to understand what you are going to do if thermal power plant don't meet the 2022 deadline. So in a big surprise, on 1st of April 2021, we got a new notification. Now this notification diluted the earlier notification. It divided the thermal power plant in 3 categories: category A, category B, category C. In category A, all the thermal power plant in NCR and million plus city come. In category B, thermal power plant in critically polluted area and non-attainment city come, and others come in the category C. Now, what is the ministry says? In this notification, we have got a strong deterrence mechanism, but we say it's a weak deterrence mechanism. Reason: if you look at what is the cost of FGD installation, it comes something, it comes something around 45 lakhs per megawatt. Now, what is the maximum penalty which MOEFCC have provided in the notification? The maximum penalty is rupees 8 lakhs per megawatt for category A plant, which has to meet the deadline in 2022, and 5 lakhs for thermal power plant in category C, which has to meet the deadline in 2024. So what we say, non-compliance is much, much cheaper than compliance. So how it is going to push industry to comply? Last point, retiring plant. Some kind of data is there with the ministry. These thermal power plant, around 34 gigawatt, are going to retire. So they have been given the deadline 2025. What if they don't meet the 2025 deadline? They can also give a small penalty and continue. But what does that mean? Does the ministry need 20 crore, 30 crore, or good health of its people, or good environment for its people? But what ministry has said, I have some of my batchmates there in ministry, they said, Nivit, let's give time. First time we have introduced such high penalty. But if you look at the past, what has happened? Thermal power plant get something called fixed charge. Fixed charge is something which is between thermal power plant and DISCOM. DISCOM has to give that much money to the thermal power plant for particular number of years according to the contract. And it comes to something around 200, 300, 100 crores. CPCB has some kind of penalty mechanisms where they have penalized some of the thermal power plant. And what was the range? Something around 1.5 crore, 0.75 crore. But what happened at the end? We were happy that ministry penalized. I think if I'm not wrong, I think none of the thermal power plant have paid even this amount. Forget the high amount which the new notification talks about. Closure, somebody can ask, okay, why don't you set the closure? Old thermal power plant or non-compliant? But because of the essential nature of the sector, it cannot be done. Another issue with the coal-based thermal power plant. It has huge Ghg footprint. If you look at some old data, the coal consumption in the sector have increased from 300 million ton to 300 million ton in 2006 and 7 to 600 million ton in 2017 and 18. This is 2/3 of the country's total coal consumption. Simultaneously, Ghg emission have increased from 500 to 100 million ton from 2005 to 2015. If you look at the India's total Ghg emission, India's total Ghg emission is around 3 billion ton. Ghg emission comes around 1.1. It is 1/3 of the total Ghg emission. Now, apart from thermal power plant, cement, iron, steel also have captive power plant. So if you combine, it's come to around 50% of the country's total fuel-related CO2 emission. So it means there is massive opportunity to decarbonize. CSE has done a study last year where we said, if you look at the first two, blue and red bar, you can see not much. As we have seen the first slide, not much increase in the capacity is happening, and in business as usual scenario, not much increase in the Ghg emission will take. But if you apply the decarbonization strategy, it has potential to reduce 22% of the emission by 2030. Now, what are the options? Options are advanced boilers, ultra and supercritical boilers. We have to also talk about closure of old thermal power plant. I'm not saying close. You can talk about converting into renewable. You can also talk about co-firing. The last point is, like these boilers can be co-fired with biomass till 10%. Now, yesterday morning with Minister Sunita ji raised this topic, forest-based economy. Few years back, I went to a pulp and paper industry in Sweden. So there the owner of the factory took me to his forest. In Sweden, forest belongs to individual. He said, this is the area. These are the plants which my father have planted so that I can cut in the future. And this is the area which I have cut. Now I will plant so that my kid can cut in future. So we need to talk about such kind of forest-based economy. When it comes to biomass, we have got huge potential. Some rough data shows we have got around 500 million tons of biomass across the country. It has huge potential. It will not only reduce your Ghg emission, also SOx and NOx. There are issues with the PM, but with high-tech electrostatic precipitator in thermal power plant, even PM can be managed. What is required? A small modification. Thermal power plants are big giant. They can create a supply chain mechanism, and it can have many co-benefit agendas, like local employment through pellet or briquette manufacturing. And the good point is, our Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has presented in this budget that thermal power plants should start co-firing from 5 to 10%. But our studies show even this can go as high as 40 to 50%. So this is my last slide, and I want to end this. What I said at the start, thermal power plant, coal-based are not going anywhere. But what we need to do to clean them up. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now ask my colleague Aditya Batra to give us the overview on the renewable sector. And then, of course, we have three panelists to discuss that further. Aditya, please. 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'll be short. You can see. Okay, great, thanks. Hi, my name is Aditya. And so what I'm trying to do at this particular presentation is just to... Sorry. No, yeah. So, all right. So what I will try to do is just to lay out a broad framework of what's coming next, and also to kind of just lay the numbers in perspective and point out some of those particular issues that are of emerging concern to CSE. So it'll be fairly short and fairly quick. So if you look at the 5 low carbon commitments that have been recently laid out for the country, I'm going to be focusing essentially on part 1 and 2, right? And the others have been, of course, covered in other sessions, etc. I don't want to again repeat the same slides that were presented both by Nivit as well as by Sunita, but just to give you a sense of, you know, are we on track to meet the target right now, okay, for RE. So the RE goal of 450 gigawatts by 2030, in order for us to meet this, we need to add roughly about 35 gigawatts of renewable energy power each year. But we've added only 10 gigawatts in the past year. Now, everybody seems to be a lot, you know, very gung-ho about these targets to say, yes, we will achieve it. And frankly, there is a high possibility that we will, but the time to act is fairly soon and fairly like now, actually, in order for us to meet the 2030 goal of that. If you look at the, you know, where we're looking at the RE installed capacities by 2022 by sector, small hydro accounts for about 5% or so, wind will be about 40%, large solar about 42.5%, rooftop solar about 8%, and about biopower 10 to 11%. That's the kind of overall mix that we are seeing in 22. Okay. As of the latest figures, of course, as of 31st January 22, India had an installed capacity of about 106 gigawatts of renewable power, right? As of now, that's where we stand right now. Okay. So I want to move quickly because the next 2 speakers will be unpacking a lot of these issues as you know, when they come on. Just want to issue, you know, here are the 6 big things that we see that happening. What are the roadblocks, challenges, and how do we need to, you know, ensure that we are able to scale up to the ambition? It's very clear that the future of renewables is linked to the health of the electricity, of what we call DISCOMs, right? So DISCOM health is extremely important for a very viable upscaling of RE as we go along. Another big challenge, and I'll unpack this as we go along, is what is called curtailment of power, which is, you know, electricity is produced by RE, but it's not really taken up by distribution companies so which leads to a lot of loss and uncertainty in the markets. Increasingly, as you know, the efficiencies and the new technologies in renewable energy space are improving so rapidly. You know, what was very expensive at one time is much cheaper today. And I'll show you some figures just to give you a sense. So a lot of state governments and DISCOMs, which are already under pressure, are trying to renegotiate with these developers to say, listen, we can't afford to pay you the old rates and please give us the new rates, okay? So the whole issue of how power purchase agreements are again being renegotiated. The hike in GST rates that have been announced, those can again act like a deterrent, and something needs to be done about that. Then there are the more technical issues, both in terms of scale and also the kind of the renewable power technology that is being deployed. We need to ensure that, for instance, that with this massive upscaling that is being envisaged for RE in the country, that our grid is actually capable of handling that new RE power. Okay. That's also important. It's not just because when you upload this load of RE onto the grid, there are severe technical challenges, and the speakers and Mr. Batra here will be able to also tell us a little more in case there are specific queries on that. And the last bit is, we tend to forget that, energy access remains the primary driver for, and should remain the primary driver for a country like India. In fact, for countries across the global south. Okay, and I'll unpack some of these just to give you a quick sense. Okay, so distribution companies are in trouble. We've heard of that. Look at the dues that are there. 20,000 crores just towards a payment of RE that's being as of November 2019, and the pandemic years have been very unkind to this because of all the waivers, etc., that the state governments have announced. So the debt of these discoms has really increased and ballooned over there. Okay, as of February 22, discoms owe power companies over 1 lakh crores in debt. So these are, and on the same discom companies, we are expected to build the new future for RE, and that's going to be very, very difficult as we go up, right? What's also very challenging for discoms right now is that they have started, or they may soon start, and this pace of that will increase as we go along. They're losing paying customers. Captive green power by institutional commercial rooftop solar is one way where you bypass the discom. The hydrogen policy, which is now letting RE power developers sell directly to green hydrogen manufacturers, again bypassing the discom. So whatever the income, the new income streams, a lot of these are not in the purview of these discoms anymore, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge, and something will need to be done about that. Okay, because discoms are they remain a very vital source as a backup. Okay, for captive clean power, and also for for batteries. If you don't have discoms, then you'll have to increase your storage capacity tremendously. So you will need to plug in your RE into the various distribution systems that already exist, for which the infrastructure already exists in much across the country. Okay. Curtailment of power, again, is like I said, will lead to substantial losses, and there is no restitution for developers. There is no way that developers can be paid back for this, because there is no real system in place to compensate them for the loss for curtailment, right, for the developers. And it's very, very common in wind and solar projects in particular, right? So when you set up these RE facilities, especially in wind and solar, and you're feeding into the grid, there are what are called must-run assurances that are given, that you must pick renewable energy and make sure that these are prioritized over other forms of energy, except in the case of thermal power plants, because you have to maintain a base load of around 55% or so. Now, this doesn't normally happen specifically in solar and wind. I mean, these are the two key things which are a bit of a problem, right? And there is no transparency in the process. It's very difficult to get data on this. So you get data on, I'm generating this much, but really the discoms are not picking up, and there is a big slippage there between what is being produced and what is actually being paid for. Okay. And this is also compounded by the fact that where, for instance, curtailment is worse in areas which has poor grid availability, especially in RE-rich states. So Tamil Nadu, for instance, which is a big thing for in the monsoon months, you have a huge amount of electricity that's being produced by wind, but that there's a huge amount of curtailment that happens at that point in time, right? Which are not able to uptake that kind of load. So curtailment issues it remains a big problem. Finance and tech like I said, the reverse bidding tariffs have fallen steeply. Just look at this. I mean, solar utility, the rates have dropped from 10.5 rupees in 2012 to about 2 rupees today. Okay. Wind has fallen from 7.5 to 2.85 or so today. So when you have those kinds of rates, and remember when these deals were being negotiated, they were being negotiated for a long period of time, right? And now suddenly you have new plants that are coming up that are able to provide electricity at such cheaper rates. Obviously, the discoms and the state governments are really reeling under that huge onslaught of, of potential losses that they see on that. So of course, there are huge Andhra Pradesh and now Punjab have started, either trying to cancel or renegotiate. A lot of these matters have reached the High Court as well on it. So this primarily affects the first generation projects, right? Which were there, which had these high kind of rates. I pointed out the height in GST rates and import duty on solar components, which is again going to increase the cost on projects. This is another challenge that we will need to overcome and try to see how best we can actually compensate for this. Grid management remains an important problem. Like I pointed out earlier, you're looking at a huge, everyone's gung-ho about the amount of renewable energy power, but what it's going to do to the grid, and for a grid that is much improved recently, but still has huge gaps and weaknesses. We can't afford to have the grid collapse just because you have a huge ambition in RE, right? So there are technology challenges over there. We need better forecasting, better scheduling. We need to make sure that the grid is flexible enough to actually take in the different types of power sources that are being fed to it, frequency, harmonization, etc. Okay, so I'm just switching track just quickly over here, just to give you a sense of where we see the potential that's coming for meeting these huge targets. One is, of course, repowering wind. Okay, if you look at this, if you look at the difference between, look at the potential that we have right now of wind. It's tremendous over there. And what's happened is the best sites for wind have been taken over by the older plants. So the first generation of wind turbines were actually set up at the best sites. And as you know, the technology wasn't as good, the windmills weren't as good, they were not producing as much as a newer windmill could, but the best sites have been actually taken away by this. So there are certain moves afoot right now to actually try to see how best those old sites can be then fitted with the latest and the best, so that you actually get a lot more bang for buck, right, for this. Wind as such, overall, with huge potential of 302 gigawatts. We have right now, we have an installed capacity of about 39 or so gigawatts, and another 10 that is being under development. Biomass in coal-based thermal plants is another big win-win that we see, and Nivit has spoken about it recently. And this is a great kind of a win for circularity, because here right now you have the whole issue of agriculture waste that can actually be fed for this. It's good for climate, it's good for agriculture, it's good for pollution mitigation. So if we can increase and we can push the ambition right now from 5 to 10, so say about 15 to 20, that's another great option for cleaner energy and for circularity. Okay. I want to then just end very quickly on looking at access issues, because like I pointed out at the very beginning, all the big power that is going to be fed into the grid and all the big ambition that we have needs to boil down to access. Okay. So the grid may have reached 99% of India's population, but electricity has not. Okay, let me rephrase that. Electricity of quality electricity has not. And we have huge power cuts, and you have the continuing existence of either decentralized renewable options, such as your own solar panel on your roof, and you've just got a bulb over there and you're trying to run a small business late into the evening, or you have places in smaller towns where you have huge electricity cuts and you have smaller diesel-based generators that are then producing electricity for a captive audience, right, of people. So together with this huge expansion of the grid and huge kind of expansion of our capacity, electricity and quality electricity is not reaching. So we do have a very clear need to also look very clearly at mini grids and look at decentralized energy options that work in close harmony with the larger mainstream national plans for scale up. Okay, that's very important for us. If you talk to mini grid producers around the country, they will have a litany of problems, but they will also tell you what the good parts about and what are the good aspects of mini grids, right? So it's about service steadfastness. It's about operational efficiency. These are smaller. You can actually respond very quickly. You can have very tailored solutions, and in fact, CAC did a very interesting compendium of different case studies from across the country, trying to look at the different technologies and options that were available in the mini grid space. And we were quite surprised at the kind of options that were there and the potential for this particular sector, right? And I can share that with you as we go along a little later. So you can address energy poverty, and the best part about all of this that we found is that customers are willing to pay more for reliable electricity. So if I have a small business, or if I have a cold chain business somewhere in the middle of UP, and I've got these long power cuts, I'm actually willing to pay double or triple of what I would pay the government in order to ensure that I get assured quality supply of electricity so that I can run my business. So it's not a very simple thing about, decentralized would mean very expensive electricity. It also means that there is a huge willingness to pay for quality electricity. And I think that we need to keep that in mind when we are propagating for this, right? There's a huge, very long history of clean cook stoves and clean cooking across the country. And the benefits of that are very clear, both for health of women, in terms of drudgery of work, of collecting firewood. Lots of black carbon is a very big health problem right now across rural households. But imagine a situation where you would have clean electricity that is produced in a decentralized manner, and then you are able to promote clean cooking through electricity on that. So we are looking at that as a potential model. We're trying to see the modeling, if that will work or not for us as we go forward. A large part of this is going to be the agenda of the CSE's program as we go ahead. Right? And I think this is the last slide now. It's clear that, it's good to be excited about mini grids, but it's also, we need a reality check over here, because we need to ensure that the economics of the small always need support, right? So it's expensive, but there's a willingness to pay, but not, there's a willingness to pay only for livelihood options when this electricity is being used for livelihoods, right? But not for regular household use. So we do need some kind of a tariff, some kind of a support policy to ensure that the producers that are setting up these mini grids are adequately compensated and fairly compensated for their efforts of putting these up. Okay. There was a policy that's still in draft stage of the National Policy on Mini and Micro Grids of 2016. We need to be able to influence that to make sure that some of these concerns are actually addressed. Okay. Grid interactivity is a huge problem. We've covered mini grid development across the global south, both in Africa as well as in South Asia. And the one big thing that we've noticed is, as soon as the grid approaches, all these developers and all the communities that have been supporting the mini grids just kind of vanish. And they basically say that, no, okay, because the population and everybody wants to get onto the grid. Nobody wants the headache of running a mini grid right now. So we need to address that. We need to address that whatever is the surplus power that is being generated by mini grids is fed into the grid in a harmonious manner, and that that create a win-win situation for both. Otherwise, if you have the vast expansion of the grid, it's difficult for the mini grids to survive on their own unless there is some kind of support on this. Okay. It's clear the government is serious about this, because as recently as just last month, a few days ago, the government has actually announced a livelihood applications policy for DREs in India. And this is something, again, gives you a clear sense that how closely the government sees energy access as very, very important for livelihood promotion in India. And this should also give us a sense that, yeah, this is good. Last point on huge learnings from the global south. In fact, when we convened a meeting of mini grid developers from across the country, one of the key lessons was that why don't you guys actually look at what's happening in Rwanda? Why don't you guys look at what's happening in Tanzania? Why don't you look at what's happening in Nepal? Different technologies, different scales, but the kind of policy framing that was in these countries is so useful for a country like India. If we can learn from them, and then there is many things that they can learn from us. So we do need that kind of a global South dialogue. And we at CSE see ourselves as well placed in order to be able to at least facilitate that in some way. Okay, so I'll stop here just to let you know what's coming next, so that we can, it's a great panel that we have. We have Sumant Sinha, who's the chairperson and CEO of Renewable, based out of Gurgaon. We have Mr. Pankaj Batra, who's here with us here, who's the former chairperson and member planning of Central Electricity Authority, and also the project director at SARI, at Iradi. And we have Sunil Wadhwa, who's the founder CEO of Multiple Orbits Consulting. So 3 big names and great presentations that we look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. Very nice. So I think I have Sumant on. Available. Hi, Sumant. How are you?
Hi, Sunita. How are you doing?
Good. We are about 65, 70 of us in the room, which I'm not sure he can see, but
I can.
Wonderful. You can see us. Yes, of course, you can see us. Wonderful. Yeah. So, Sumant, you've heard Aditya and my colleague. So we are essentially in this session, as we explained, discussing the energy future. And we know coal will stay. We need to clean up coal. But the growth, the big growth up to 2030 is renewable. And we cannot think of anyone better than you to help us to understand, how do you see the growth and the impediments that we flagged? How do you see those coming in your way? And what will then be the future? Sumant, up to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sunita, and thank you so much for inviting me. And I apologize for not being with you in person and with all the wonderful people there in the audience that I can see. It's quite a full room. So again, apologies that I couldn't be there with you in person, but terrific still to be nevertheless able to have a chat with all of you. So, this is a topic obviously that is very close to my heart. This is what I've been doing for the last many years, and I can talk about it for a long period of time. So 20 minutes, I'll try to encapsulate as much of the thoughts that I have on this topic. So, renewable energy, Aditya made a presentation, of course, where he talked about how costs have come down. But to give some anecdotal color to the numbers, when I started this company about 11 years ago, at that time, wind was about 5 or 6 rupees a kilowatt hour, and solar was at 15, 16 rupees. And obviously, till about 2017 or thereabouts, both, wind had come down to maybe about 5 rupees or thereabouts. Solar was still 5 or 6 rupees also. And by comparison, coal-based power was around anywhere from 4 to 5 rupees. So we'd come close, but we'd actually not broken through. But I think over the last 3 years, there has been a sea change, because now not only have we broken through, but we've actually got prices to come down to such an extent that it actually offers a lot of room for doing a lot of other things. For example, doing a lot of the intermittency management that Aditya referred to as being fundamental issues. Solar today, as he presented, is not 199. That was just a one-off bid, but I think it's closer to, let's say, 240, 250 or thereabouts. Wind is about 325, 350, but now significantly cheaper than coal-based power. So I think there's been a fairly significant change that has happened. And as a result of that, therefore, as DISCOMs look to buy more power, renewables obviously ends up being the most obvious thing for them to look at. But I'll give you some data points. You talked about growth, Sunita, and that's exactly right. India's per capita consumption of power is only a third of the global average. And if you exclude India from that, the rest of the global average, we're actually a quarter. And so we have a lot of room to go to catch up with where the rest of the world is at in terms of power consumption. Now, India's power market is already the third largest in the world, even though our consumption on a per capita basis is so low. So can you imagine if our per capita consumption catches up to even the global average, we'll need 4 times the size of the power sector that we have right now. And therefore, there is incredible growth that will happen. And in a way, therefore, even though we have the third largest power market in the world, there is this great opportunity for India to leapfrog our power system into a less carbon intensive power system from this point on. And technology is now making a lot of that possible. And so when I look out into the future, and I'm not just going to look at 2030, but look out into 2040 and 2050 as well, because ultimately the carbon journey will not have reached its conclusion by that time. We'll have to look at what's going to happen beyond that as well. What is very clear is that for electricity at least, the technology solution is now available in that we know how to decarbonize electricity. Wind and solar are cheaper. You can combine them now with batteries and find a commercial solution that is kind of like baseload power and is significantly cheaper than coal-based power. And so therefore, we know that this is ultimately going to play out, how this is going to play out. Let's say by 2030, 2040, I would say that all new capacity addition or all new demand creation that comes up will be met through renewables. And post 2030, I would imagine that we can start looking at replacing coal-based power as well. Now, that's in India. In other countries, the replacement has already started. In the Western world, replacement is already what is driving the addition of renewable energy. In India, because of this insane demand growth that we'll have, therefore, we'll need to continue to work on meeting the demand before we can start replacing our legacy systems. But eventually, beyond 2030, that will happen as well, because I think there are more and more people getting into the sector. There's more capital coming in. The large oil and gas companies have now realized that the future of energy is not fossil fuels any longer. So they are coming in with all their implementation might and their ability to make large investments and so on, which is not obviously great for a company like us to have more competition, but obviously it's absolutely essential for this energy transition. So I think that is one fundamental thing that is happening, which is that electricity is going to get decarbonized. The technology solutions are now very much available. It's now just a question of following through to the logical conclusion of getting it done. And that will, of course, take several years. The second big thing that is happening is also that electricity accounts for only a quarter of total carbon emissions globally. In India, that number may be a little bit higher because the penetration of energy is not that high. But certainly, electricity is only maybe at most 30% of total carbon emissions. And so the question is, how do we solve the balance part of the carbon emissions problem? And this is where, again, new technologies and solutions are emerging that are making it very interesting. And again, bringing the future a little bit more into the current situation right now. And what I'm talking about is, of course, that if you look at the balance, let's say 2/3 or 70% of energy consumption that drives carbon emissions, mobility obviously accounts for a large chunk of that. And mobility is not just electric vehicles on the roads, but it's also maritime and it's also civil aviation. Those are equally as big as electric as surface transportation is. The other areas, of course, are the hard to abate sectors, which I'm sure you must have talked about, which are industries like cement, steel, refining, fertilizers, etc., which also emit a lot of carbon dioxide and therefore also need to be addressed. And up till now, while the solutioning for electricity was being found, the solutioning for the other areas was not that clearly visible. Now what's happening is, with the emergence of green hydrogen, and now obviously this, of course, we've all read a lot of talk about it, but certainly green hydrogen looks like it can provide that bridge between electricity and the other areas of carbon dioxide emissions. And not perfectly, but quite substantially. And therefore, as you know how you make green hydrogen is electrolyzing water, for which also you need electricity. And so therefore, if you look at projections of the penetration of electricity into the energy mix by 2050, that number is actually going up to almost 70 to 75% from the current 25 to 30%. And so electricity as a percentage of total energy is going to increase very substantially. And because that electricity is going to become cleaner and cleaner, that gives us hope that in the future, energy as a whole is also likely to get decarbonized. And so these two energy transitions that are playing out between decarbonization of electricity and deepening electricity within the energy sector is going to actually bring a lot of the solutioning to bear in terms of the whole issue of reducing carbon emissions in the energy sector. Now, that's the long-term future, and that is what is likely to happen 2030, 2040, 2050. But the question is, what about the here and now, which is, of course, the important aspect. And we all know that if we don't bend the trajectory now very substantially, the battle would have been lost. And the latest IPCC report clearly says that 1.5 degrees centigrade is pretty much now baked in, and we need to start thinking about adaptation against that 1.5 degrees centigrade. But we can't have any more than that, and therefore bending that trajectory is really very critical, and therefore these next 10 years are so critical. Now sort of coming to the issue of where are we on our own renewables journey as a country. Of course, Aditya talked about all the targets and everything. He also talked about some of the problems. Now, we've actually made a lot of progress on rolling out renewables, more than most other countries have done in the world over the last 7-8 years. And I think, we must give credit where it's due. I think successive policymakers in India have been able to push forward renewable energy. We could easily have taken the view that we used to take earlier, that look, carbon emissions is not our fault, and therefore don't look to us for solutions. But fortunately, there was some enlightened thinking within the government, and therefore they took the view that we need to push renewables. Now, of course, there was no real discourse behind it, but this view emerged, and thank God it did, because it's allowed India to become reasonably mature in our own renewables journey. And it is now, India is now the third or fourth largest market in the world for renewables. So we're already quite large, but we are likely to be among the top two, apart from China, of course, over the next 8 to 10 years, if we are able to meet our targets. Now that throws up a lot of opportunities, but also potentially problems. Opportunities are really around the fact that while we are doing a lot of work on the renewable energy side, the green economy is going to become one of the biggest opportunities globally over the next several decades. And it is going to require trillions and trillions of dollars of investments. Now, just to give you all a sense, the oil and gas industry, over which so many wars have been fought and so much geopolitics has been done and written and so on, and there are such large companies in that space, that sector has been investing about $500 to $700 billion every year globally. The power sector has seen investments of about $300 billion globally. Now, just in renewables over the next several years, we need $1.5 trillion worth of investments, which dwarfs the investments that have been going into the entire energy value chain globally over the last several years. And so this sector is going to be a massive sector in the future. It's going to spawn many new business models and many new companies. And frankly, we're just at the beginnings and at the infancy of this whole evolution. Now, because India has already got a reasonable sized industry, we have the opportunity of really growing it and taking advantage of creating of really leaning into this whole energy transition and really creating companies and business models of size and scale, which of course is required for India itself, but eventually can become big global companies as well. So I think there is a business opportunity also that is now emerging, and that business opportunity and the ability to create businesses in India is what is now driving very large pools of capital into this sector in India. And therefore, to my mind, capital will not be a constraining factor in this evolution. The ability to implement on the ground, while it used to be a problem earlier with land issues and connectivity issues and transmission issues and so on, I think most of those problems are going to get solved because more and more people are coming into the sector, and the government is being quite proactive about planning transmission grids. So I don't think that will be a constraining factor. The constraining factor really primarily is going to be two things. One is going to be the fact that as we have more and more renewables in the grid, intermittency management will have to be done very smartly. Now you can do it very expensively by just putting batteries everywhere, or you can do it very smartly by bringing down the cost by doing demand side management and combining wind and solar together and having better software systems, and thereby minimizing the amount of batteries that you require. So a lot of work needs to be done on the grid management. And the other area, which again Aditya referred to, is of course the distribution utilities in India. And we all know that that's the giant Achilles heel of this entire rollout that we want to do. Because ultimately, it's the distribution companies that face the consumers, and it's a monopoly. Nobody is allowed to get into that area. And these companies are in poor financial health. They're not investing in any of this grid infrastructure and development that I talked about earlier. They're not upgrading their networks at the pace and speed at which they need to. And they're not providing good quality service to either retail customers or to corporate customers. And so, and fundamentally, they're being used, unfortunately, more or less as ATMs by politicians. And every election that happens, we witness more of that. So unless this sector is resolved, we will always be hamstrung in terms of rolling out the renewable energy business and solar within that. So I think the central government understands this problem, but the issue is it's such a political problem. And, so many, almost every state government, different political parties, all of them, there's some sort of a quasi-political consensus around at the state level across multiple political parties that the state of affairs should continue. And so despite the central government's best efforts, even their own, wherever they have the state governments, unfortunately, are not moving fast enough in this direction. So I think this is, as I said, an area that really needs to be resolved. And again, this is no secret. It's something that we've all talked about and we are all aware of. Beyond that, I think the other thing that is going to be testing the government is going to be the area of policy making, because technology is evolving so rapidly. The demands and the solutions that are emerging are so rapidly changing that policy making needs to move along with that really quite rapidly. And very often, just given the nature of the system of governance that we have, it goes at a certain pace. Yeah. And there are many different people with different points of view and voices that approach the problem differently. And so that whole process needs to also be streamlined at some level. And we need a little bit more sort of clear-cut decision making in some areas. And solar PLI, for example, is a case in point. We essentially had very low GST and very low customs duty on the imports of modules. That created a demand for modules. And then we said, you know what, let's stop imports, let's put in place a high customs duty, and let's give manufacturing incentives to develop the domestic manufacturing ecosystem. Perfect, absolutely well thought through and so on. But what's happened is that we've imposed a customs duty. The solar PLI process has got delayed for a variety of different reasons that I won't go into. And therefore, nobody is setting up manufacturing in India right now. It's all got delayed. And so we'll suddenly have a point in time, literally a year later, where because customs duty will be there and you can't import any longer, and domestic capacity would not have come up because PLI has got delayed. And therefore, suddenly you'll have a 1 year to 2 year hiatus at which God alone knows how that timeline will get dealt with. So that just leads to needless uncertainty and risk that is avoidable, right? Similarly, when customs duties come in, then we have to go to the regulators and get refunds from them. And that whole process takes a year or two because the discoms say we don't want to pay all of that extra money. And so it just leads to a lot of friction in the system. So these are things that we have to try to avoid, and therefore policy making is very important in that regard. So let me stop here and say that, look, I am by and large very optimistic about our sector. There's a lot of room to grow, clearly because of where India is on its own evolutionary development journey. Technology and solutions are now available that allow us to meet this new demand in a carbon sort of free way. But we need some of these issues to get solved if we are to really take advantage of this opportunity in the short run. But longer term, the opportunity will continue to evolve and become much bigger as we go forward. Thank you, Sunita.
Thank you. Mr. Batra, as you're here, and I know everybody will have more questions for you. So I'm going to, Sumant, will you be able to stay? I know your diary was quite full. So will you be able to stay for a while? Because I'm going to now ask Mr. Sunil Vadva actually to come in and make a short intervention. And then we are very privileged that we have Mr. Batra here. So he's going to actually, I'm going to use him to demystify a lot of things also and bring us a little bit down to earth, which means there'll be some questions for you. So, Mr. Vadva, can I now ask you to come in and, if I may, ask you to give us a brief intervention, particularly in the areas where on energy access. As Aditya flagged that off, that's an area where CSE is very committed, area we feel very strongly about. And we are trying to understand whether clean energy can be a very major driver of that energy access. Mr. Vata.
Thank you, Sunita, for asking me to speak on this very interesting and very important subject. Seeing Sumant, I recall, Sumant, if you recall, you asking us, when will the grid station be ready in Rajasthan or Gujarat? Because your project was coming up, but the grid station was not there. And you made us work very hard to, come online with your COD. So just to start on a lighter note, I thought I will remind Sumant and myself that how important energy access is to the whole energy ecosystem. Now, I like to actually say only things which are my own experiences, because all of you know everything about the power sector, so I don't want to repeat most of the time. But I think the need for energy access is on a macro level evident by the fact that we are consuming about 1/3 of the national global average in terms of per capita consumption of power. And there is a general feeling that, per capita income being low, therefore our consumption is low. But the truth is that the consumption is low because of lack of proper access to energy, or the energy being accessible, because the energy is there. We have a surplus power situation by many calculations, but there are about 20% of people still who just have a transformer at the periphery of their village, but no power inside their houses. So I think that is one of the major factors. And there is so much of suppressed and latent demand which is waiting to be unleashed or captured. And there are new sources of demand which today's consumers who are not having electricity can't even dream of. I really feel sad when many times very senior people in the government and bureaucracy have made a statement that we have surplus power in our country in the backdrop of we only consuming 1/3 of the global average and almost 1/15 of Western countries. So where is the catch? Let me share with you my experience, which belied all economic laws. I'm a student of finance and economics. So we had in Tata Power Delhi, when I was the CEO, 1 year where the AT&C losses came down by 11% in just one single year. And we found that people were like sort of, feeling it's very expensive to consume electricity because we have to pay for every unit that they consume. So we all felt that prudence will set in and there is going to be a fall in the consumption, or at least the growth will not be as much as what is the national average. And it suited us when filing an ARR to show a lower demand, because then the tariff is higher if the demand is low, because you have the overheads to be, spread. But we were really surprised, happily, that our growth in that next year, which was the projection year, was 3 times the national average growth of power. And in a year when the power tariffs were higher than when before we took over the Delhi Vidyut Board, in a year when there was no possibility of stealing power by major consumers, only one factor that we had forgotten was that we had strengthened our networks in such a way that power was available all the time that you need. Now, this really belied our assumptions of economic laws of price elasticity of demand. The demand is elastic to the price. It was not the case. So the point, therefore, I'm making is that if you take the case of FMCG products, like for example, major multinational FMCG companies never used to concentrate on the rural side of the business, thinking that they don't have the purchasing power. But when the roads were laid and the access to the rural areas became much better than it was before, the growth, as far as, let's say, for example, Hindustan Levers, the maximum growth is coming from the rural market. So I think it proves the point that access is so important for the overall growth of the sector itself. And not only that, from the social standpoint also, lack of energy access, I think, is the biggest constraint to the 2030 agenda. When you talk about the first one of eradication of poverty, quality of life, healthcare, life expectancy, quality of education, easing of time for women and children to do much better things than they are today doing, as Aditya alluded on. So safe drinking water. I mean, these are so many elements of having an inclusive human settlement that all depend on or are greatly enabled by energy access. And when I mean energy access, means reliable power being made accessible. Now, a few other aspects of energy access, which I want to share my perspective. There are versus excess and climate change. There are conflicting and positive interplays. When we talk about more energy excess, there is definitely a positive interplay with deforestation and soil degradation. Like, for example, that's one positive. But then suddenly when you look at the conflict, as some say, between energy excess and reduction of emissions, there are many studies, I don't need to tell you, which actually show that there is a minor correlation being negative, if at all there is a negative correlation. So I think those apprehensions really need to be thrown out of the window. But if there are some apprehensions, I think there is a need to seriously look at the off-grid decentralized model. And I have just sent you a mail also. I'll very, very briefly touch on that. And a few points why I think that is important to consider is that the transmission, which is the primary way of accessing power. I mean, I'm assuming that the power is already been generated by Mr. Sumant Sinha. Now somebody has to take that power to the consumers. So on a renewable capacity, generally the spend is about 2.5 times of what a thermal capacity has to be, catered by transmission, because the PLFs of renewable definitely are about 2.5 times lower than thermal. So in that context, and also if we see that today the most deprived are the guys who are most underprivileged financially. So to look at an off-grid model where the entire cost of the off-grid generation and distribution is loaded onto the consumer is not sustainable, is not going to work. So a de-risking of that model to bring in DISCOM as a counterparty, whereas the generation of solar power or wind power or any other form of renewable is taking at the load center itself. So you save a lot of money and a lot of carbon emission also, which is involved in the steel and other things which actually go along with the transmission lines. And if the DISCOM becomes the buying agency for that power and sells to the consumers, I mean, a consumer in the far off places, you can't expect him to pay 5 times what his cousin is paying, say, in Patna. So a tripartite model, which I have sent you, and maybe I can also basically talk just a minute on that, where the consumer ends up paying only what the consumer would have paid to the DISCOM. Yeah. And the rest of it is a bidding process where whoever quotes the lowest, the delta, which has to be paid by the DISCOM, gets the project. So there is zero risk of getting stranded or abandoned when the main grid comes in, because the power will still continue to flow to that grid. So I think that these are some of the areas where one has to look at it. However, one good thing about the transmission system as an investment proposition, which is also very, very important for the power sector, because today when we look at distribution companies, not many players would like to come into the distribution because of risk involved. Same is the case with generation. But the excess part, which is the transmission, has been in fact considered as one of the most attractive investment destinations in the entire infra space. And I think CRISIL or one of the other agencies actually had said, and we also feel that the kind of way the TBCB works, tariff-based competitive bidding works, and some of the nomination-based projects which carry a cost plus ROE, attractive yield co models are there to monetize the investments in transmission, and therefore there is a good ecosystem already existing. So I think I have made my points.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, fascinating and fascinating model. We will come back to you on that, Mr. Vadva. Very interesting that there is a possibility on this. Mr. Batra, if I may now invite you, please come here. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And for you to really talk about, you've heard it all and you know it all. I mean, you have been in every possible place in energy. So we look forward to hearing from you. How do you see this and the reality check on this?
Yeah, renewable energy transition is what the topic is for this session. I mean, you talked in the introductory session about coal being still a part of it till a number of years. So, you know, investment which is sunk is public money basically, because the major portion of this is through loan by banks. Right. So if that money is stuck, everybody's money is stuck. That's what we don't want. I mean, we got to see the economics as well as the environment, both. And you can't sacrifice one for the other. Somebody copied it. Who copied it? I gave it in the pen drive, right? Yeah. These are the old presentations. Right. Oh, this one. Not working. Screen is not working. Yes. I've got it in my laptop, so I could put that straight. Yeah.
But that won't work here. No, this laptop is very delicately configured to be.
You can't open this.
I'm not able to reach it for some reason. Maybe we can get the. I'll get it.
I think it's here, right? That's one. Yeah. Got it.
Got it.
Right. Okay.
It creates a lot of problems. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Just a second.
Yeah. Yeah. So in brief, that is what the whole thing is about. As I said, we got to look at both aspects of it, the economics as well as environment. So how do we go ahead? There is a middle path that we plan in such a way that in future, we do not plan for any coal-based generation. But point is that there are a lot of projects which are midway, you know, which are under construction or financial closure has been done. The ones under construction to see that but we can slow them down. That's what everybody is doing. There are a lot of projects where people had committed they would buy power from these coal-based stations, but they're going slow because even the banks are not too many financial institutions are willing to give loans. So that's the right thing. But probably if money is sunk, it'd be very difficult to just shelve that project. Without making use of that project. But what we can plan is to go for more and more of renewables, which is happening. There are some questions raised about whether you can meet the electricity needs of or energy needs of the entire country or the entire globe only with renewable energy. And I'll show you figures with the which demonstrated that it can. Now, this is the energy consumption worldwide from 2000 to 2018, which is courtesy site which is called Statista. And in 2050, if you see, it goes up to around 700 exajoules. This is for the energy consumption till 2050. And of course, it consists of all these which are mentioned: hydroelectricity, nuclear, renewable, natural gas, oil, and coal. And this is what is envisaged by Statista, in which gives renewable energy is at the same as oil and natural gas in 2050. And coal is diminishing, so it's a smaller percentage of the energy basket. Now, if you see that in the United Nations, under the United Nations Development Program, the World Energy Council published an estimate of potential solar energy that could be used by humans each year, that took into account, of course, factors such as insolation, cloud cover, and land which is available. And the estimate found that solar energy had a potential of 1,600, at a minimum, to 49,800. So even if you take the minimum, it is enough to meet the global energy needs, which is only around 700. And you've got, at a minimum, 1,600 only from solar. And in terms of wind, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, US, they estimated a total wind generation potential of 560 picowatt hours, which is equivalent to, and for terrestrial wind, and 315 for offshore, a total of which, if you convert them to exajoules, it comes to 3180. So, and the requirement is 700 by 2050. So only solar itself is capable of meeting the entire needs of the globe. Let's see in India. Okay, this is a repetition, sorry. Yeah, so this is the growth of electricity consumption, which is there taking place till 2021, the CA figures. So if you see, it has grown a lot from. Of course, you'll have to take a little bit of a thing, because right up to the fourth last thing, it's every 5 years, whereas the growth after that is year-wise. So it's more or less the same rate, which is around 4 to 5% growth in the last few years in energy. This is electricity consumption, of course. Now, India has got a India's got a solar energy potential of 5,000 trillion kilowatt hour. And what is our requirement? If you see the last one. Yeah. So this is 315,000 gigawatt hour, which means it's gigawatt hour is million units, so 315 million units, whereas it can generate 5,000 trillion units. So even solar itself is enough to take care of the consumption in India also for right up to many years ahead, because this is a big difference between 315 and 5,000 trillion kilowatt hour, which is units. And the wind energy potential, as was also mentioned in one of the previous presentations, which was made either by Sunita or Aditya, was 695 gigawatt at 120 meters hub height, and of course at 100 meters hub height is less than that, it's about half, but we are going for 120 meters now hub height, and this is so taking a capacity utilization factor of 20% on an all India basis for wind, which is realistic. This equates to 530 billion units per year for 100 meters hub height and 1 to 1.7 billion units for 120 meters. So 1217 billion units. If you compare this, so it's only wind itself is capable of meeting this present consumption, the potential that we have. So there is enough. So from the point of energy security, yes, we can survive only on renewable energy. There are, of course, a few issues with renewable energy, that it doesn't occur. It's not controllable generation. It occurs and sometimes may not occur when you need it. But there is, of course, ways of doing that. Just take a look at this all India demand, which was met in the last in the month of January 2022. So if you see the shape of this curve, what do we see? We see that the peak demand is coming somewhere around between 11 and 12, which is coinciding with solar peak. Solar peak is also around that time. And you know why this has happened? Because many of the states have said that they will give agriculture supply during the solar time, which they've switched from previously when we didn't have so much of solar. Most of this agriculture supply is to be given in the night. That's after peak hours, which would be around 11, 12 o'clock. And there were other issues there because there were snake bites for people, watering their farms at that time. So that has changed. A lot of states have become wise and started giving. That's how the peak demand is shifted. And agriculture, counting industries, commercial, residential, etc. So which is sensible thing to do. It started with a few states, and it is. Most states are adopting that now. So you are molding your demand curve in accordance with availability of generation, which is good. Now, if you see the regional, that was the all India demand. So if you see the regional peak curve on the same date, 31st January, you'll find only one state, which is Eastern region, has a higher peak in the evening, which is between 18 and 19. All the other regions have got the peak during the daytime. So I think that's just for everybody's information, because I think this is all very useful. Now, how do we meet this generation when we have different? So these are the different types of generation on that same date. How we see solar. So these are not equal scales. So on the right side, so solar is not actually so high. For solar, wind, hydro, and gas, it's the right side scale which you have to see, and all the other ones you have to see the left scale. But you'll get an idea of the generation, because when you have more of solar generation, you'll see that hydro is back down, because hydro is storable. In most of these many of them are pondage based, or pondage is where you have storage for about 3 or 4 hours of water, and that's again a sensible thing to do. When you have more availability of energy, use it when the sun goes down or when the sun is not there. But if you combine all this, I've combined this. So the top one is the load curve, and how that is met, or that has been met on 31st January. If you see the thermal, which includes coal and lignite, that is the one which is the first one. There's a major portion of it. After that, if you see, that's hydro. So hydro is also varied over the day. This is 24 hours. So when the solar is there, it comes on full steam, then the hydro generation is reduced, and it again picks up when solar goes down. So this is a good way of doing it. So this is how these are challenges, but they can be handled, as I said. These are, of course, generation which is consolidated over the entire country. But if you take the intermittencies don't get seen so much, because it's an aggregate thing, which shows that you can achieve balancing in a much better way if you balance on an all India basis, rather than if you balance it state wise or wind farm wise. Now, just to see that, just to show you that this peak demand has shifted to the middle of the day. This was for January, but if you see in September also, it's the same. So if you see the peak demand is again coming between 11 and 12 in September also. Okay. Now challenges in just to tell you how renewable has been increasing over the years from 2007-8 to 2020-21. So the blue one is solar, which has increased the fastest. The red one is wind, which is also going up, but the highest ramp up is in solar. So this is what Madam you showed, I think was 2019 figures. So these are 2021 figures for installed capacity. So if you see the renewable in terms of installed capacity, the renewable forms 24% or 24 or almost 25%, whereas coal forms around 55%. So renewables is the second highest in terms of percentage in installed capacity. But in terms of generation, because there's a lower capacity utilization factor, renewable contributes to around 11% of the energy consumption, whereas coal contributes to 71. Earlier it was shown as 80, which was the case. So it's steadily reducing now. This is all taken from CA reports. Now this is how the prices of solar tariffs have stayed pretty low. They dropped and then they more or less in the same range. So now the latest one, which was 199, which is just below 2 rupees. But by and large, they've all stayed between 2 and 3 recently in the last few years, except for some exceptions. As far as wind tariffs are concerned, the latest, the one which was discovered in September 21 was around 269 to 270 per unit, whereas for a SECI, I hope you know SECI, so Solar Energy Corporation of India, which is an aggregator of demand, and it calls for bulk bids so that so as to based on the demand given by the states. And auctions conducted in Gujarat in December 21 brought it to a record low of 2 rupees 41 paisa per unit, 2 rupees 41 per unit, 43 per unit. So I'll stop at that because I wanted to give you statistics, but there are what is really required now is how do you shift this energy, because renewables depends on weather. So it depends on when the sun is available. So sun is more predictable than wind is. So sun is during the daytime, and if you need energy during other than daytime, how do you shift this? And the reason, the way it can be done is energy storage, which is playing a big role. So battery, grid scale battery is something which is prices of which have reduced, mainly lithium-ion batteries. 70% in about 7 years it has reduced, and it still keeps on reducing. But there are many other types of storage. One of them is a closed loop pump storage. I don't know if you know pumped storage. Pumped storage is one which up till now were mostly river based. The river was it acted like a normal hydro station, as well as the 2 reservoirs where if you have extra energy, you pump it from the lower reservoir to the higher reservoir, and when you need energy, you take that energy back. Now, closed loop pump hydro are not river based. They are basically streams, and they're not naturally available reservoirs, thousands of sites of which are available in the Himalayas and the southern mountains. And you don't need to do much civil work, so they take about half the time to build as compared to a river-based pump storage, as well as half the cost. West Bengal has got one pump storage plant like this, which is Purulia, and the new one that is coming up is Turga, and they've also got stage 3 coming up there. So all these are very useful and also more cost effective. And not only that, there are some other types of storage which are going to become cheap. One is the liquefied air energy storage, a 40 megawatt plant of which has been set up in UK, and there is also some other gravity based storage projects which are in the pilot stage. But these people claim are going to become cheaper than battery. And there are other technologies of battery also, which where other than lithium ion, which are progressing, and hopefully they will become cheaper as time passes on. So I think there is, but just by the way, let me tell you that bids which are being called now, are renewable plus storage by SECI or MNRE, and renewable plus storage makes it controllable generation, just like thermal. So it can replicate thermal, and the one which was bid was 1200 megawatts, which was won by Greenco, 900 megawatt by Greenco and 300 megawatt by Renew Power. And that 900 megawatt is likely to start functioning in 2023. That is using closed loop pump storage for storage and solar PV as the renewable. And that levelized tariff of that, I don't know if you know what levelized tariff means. You bring it to net present value for the 25 years of life, bring it down to, because the value of money keeps decreasing as time passes on. That is 4 rupees 4 paisa as a levelized tariff. They pay higher tariff during the peak time, which is I think 6 rupees 12 paisa for about 6 hours, and 18 hours 288 or something. So levelized tariff of 4 rupees 4 paisa, which if you build a new power station, coal-based station, even at the pit head, which is the cheapest way of doing it, you won't get a tariff like this. So there is the transition to renewables is a reality, and it's more economical as well as environment friendly. That's just what I want to tell you. I'm open to questions for any. Yeah.
Thank you. Here, and I have Sumant. I know he had a very tough program, but thank you, Sumant. Thank you so much for staying. I know you have a very busy day. And Mr. Badwa is there as well, I know. So questions. Yes, Vishwa. Can you introduce yourself and so that speakers, yes, I'll take all the questions. Yes, Chanto, and I have both of you as well. Yes, Vishwa.
I'm Vishwa Mohan. I'm from Times of India. My question is to Mr. Sumant Sinha. In fact, Mr. Batra touched upon the storage point. We know that unless and until we have affordable storage technology, we cannot make leapfrog in this. And though we have mission innovation, a lot of scientists are working on it. Do we have industries also investing in R&D for storage capacity, to build the storage capacity? And the bottom line is, unless and until we have affordable storage capacity, we cannot leapfrog in this direction. There is a suspicion at the geopolitical level that the West has this technology, but they're not sharing it with us at this juncture. India may expand its market, and then they may share it at high cost in the future. So where do actually stand now? Where Indian industries are investing in having those technology?
Very good question. Thank you, Vishwa. Sumant, can I ask you the geopolitics of storage?
Yeah, the geopolitics. So you're absolutely right, Vishwa, that storage is absolutely critical to the renewable energy story. But the amount of it that is required and when it might be required is something that can be managed a little bit. So today, for example, renewables is about 11% in the total power generation mix of the country. Various studies have shown that that number can increase to about at least 20-25%, if not to 30%, before you start requiring large amounts of storage to be put in place. And our target of 500 gigawatts by 2030 means about a 30-35% penetration. So for the next 5 to 7 years, we can still continue rolling out renewables without the need for very large scale storage. So that is point one. Point two is that as renewables become cheaper and cheaper, if today solar is about 225, 250, and if wind is 325, the first thing you can do is you can minimize the need for storage by combining wind and solar together. And for example, our company Renew Power had won a bid some time ago for what was called round the clock power, where we were required to deliver an 80% generation of power. And we were able to do so by using very small amounts of storage at a price which was about 30% cheaper than coal-based power. Now, we could have done more firming up of that power, and the cost would have gone up, but it would have still been cheaper than coal. So the only point I'm making is that by interventions on the supply side, by combining different renewable sources together and intervention on the demand side, where you incentivize people to consume more power when the sun is shining and you're generating more solar power. You can also that way minimize the need for power, for storage. So by both of these things, you can actually push out the requirement for storage for some time. And now let me address the second part of your question, because at some point you're right, storage will be required. If not 5 years later, certainly 10 years later. Now, in storage, what has happened is that, unfortunately for us, China sort of came to this view on the requirement for storage in the future much earlier than most of the countries did. And they've gone ahead and locked up a lot of the basic minerals wherever they are produced. So they've done that, but which is not to say that other minerals are not available or that other sources are not available. They are, and they will be, especially as demand increases. The second thing is that storage is driven more by the mobility sector than it is by the renewable sector. And that's a very important factor, because the demand for storage in mobility will be almost 7 to 8 times the demand for stationary storage along with renewables. So the storage story in some ways will be driven more by what's happening on the mobility side than what's happening on the stationary storage side along with renewable energy. And so the question really is, if you want to really understand what is happening in storage, you have to look at what's happening in mobility in India versus mobility in electric mobility in other countries. And you'll find that, unfortunately, India is a bit of a laggard as it comes to electric mobility at this point in time. We don't have any electric vehicles on the roads, there are very few. We don't have a charging infrastructure, all of that is not there.
So we have Mr. Munjal right after in the next session. And I think, don't bust his myths right now, so please.
But anyway, the bottom line is, just to round up this question, is that India needs to invest in manufacturing. We cannot be dependent for manufacturing capacity on countries like China, with which we have geopolitical issues, clearly. So like in solar, we also need to develop a manufacturing industry locally. Now, as that happens, companies will automatically start investing in R&D as well. By itself, that people are just not going to invest in R&D unless there is a manufacturing ecosystem that is evolving along with it. To your last point about the West has got some technology and they're hoarding it and not sharing it with us, actually, most of the research is being done in private companies. Okay, it's not being done by the government as such. If today we found, if we as a company found really interesting battery storage technologies, we could go and acquire it, just like some of our competitors in the space are now beginning to do. So nothing prevents anybody from going and acquiring technology. So I don't think that this is a bit of a myth that there is some technology that is being held back by the Western world. It's not the case, because it's not the government that develop technology, it's the private sector that does it. And you can go and do deals with them if you want to.
Thank you, Sumant. Mr. Batra, anything you want to add to this issue of storage? Because it's clearly a very important issue.
Yeah, so storage is one of the ways, but as Sumant said, that you may not require a large quantity for a number of years when storage costs will come down further. But there are two other methods which I didn't mention at that time, but I'd like to mention now, is demand side flexibility. That is a very important thing, and CRC has taken out regulation on ancillary services, which includes demand response. Demand response means you give an incentive for the consumer to reduce demand if the generation goes down in the wind or solar, and you give him you make the tariff in such a way that people respond to the. So what used to happen earlier was the generation used to respond to the demand, which is because it was controllable generation. In this way, it's the reverse way. You are making the demand correspond to the available generation by giving financial incentives. And that's a big market. It's a cheap market, and it's much cheaper than storage. So these are things which are coming just started coming to India. But of course, a lot of, if it's automated demand response, you require smart meters. Smart meters are now getting installed in a big way in India, although they were late in starting. But if you have that, then there's and another complementary thing is electric vehicles, which again is the big thing. Now you can have smart chargers which will increase or decrease the rate of charging depending on the availability of power in the grid. What better thing can you get than that? So it's a win-win situation, both for the electric mobility as well as for renewables. They're complementary to each other. So this is the second thing. This is the first thing. But the second thing is another one. That means you expand the balancing area. So you won't have the same amount of fluctuations of solar or wind at each point of the nation. That's if you expand it to the nation. But you can go beyond nations. So what the group that I'm working in is South Asia Regional Initiative in Energy Integration. We are trying to integrate Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka. If you increase this, then the interdependency will by itself reduce. And if you go one sun, one world, one grid, which is the Prime Minister's thrust, then you'll hardly need any storage at all, because it combines the whole grid. You'll have sun shining at any point of time. It'll always be overhead at some point of time in some part of the globe. So that energy can be transmitted around the globe. And as I said, there's so much of solar energy available that you can meet the total global demand only by solar energy. So that's the second thing. Yeah, so these are two things which I'd just like to tell you.
Fascinating. Yeah. First I have there, and then I'll come to you. I'll have you, Ramesh, at the back. Yes. Can you introduce yourself so that Sumant?
I'm Rishika. I'm a freelance reporter from Bangalore. So I have a question for Aditya. So it's more a clarificatory question. So you said two things. One, you said the DISCOMs are losing paying customers. So why is that a bad thing? So the biggest draw about renewable is the decentralized model. And there's a lot of dissonance between all the narratives I keep hearing, where people like to blame DISCOMs, but then again go back to the same solutions of pumping more money, then again getting back into that same loop. So why is captive, or why is hydrogen going away from DISCOMs a bad thing? So that is one question. And the second one is, you said GST hike is not advisable. So why? Because again, 90% dependence on China for imports, it's not healthy. Like if you go by actual Atmanirbhar principles, it's not healthy. So why not talk about PLI that even he was talking about, rather than saying why not stop hiking GST? So yeah.
Good. I'll come to you, Aditya. I'm going to collect a few questions. Can you note them down? Because I'm going to get I have a lot of hands. Yes, please. Please, Chitra.
Hi, I'm Chitrangada. I'm from Article 14, a website that covers a range of issues, but when it covers environment, it looks at justice and equity much more sharply. So my question to all of the panelists was, we're reporting on a lot of these green and renewable energy projects, so-called projects, and we're finding that they reproduce a lot of the patterns of displacement and dispossession that India has historically had a problem with in coal, where the indigenous communities, coal and forests overlap in the same landscapes. So for example, with solar, we are seeing pastoral communities are displaced or commons are taken over. With the so-called small hydropower, forests are taken over. There's no public hearing. They're exempted from the clearance process and all the checks and balances. So is that something that all of you could pay greater attention to? Because that is really not coming through in all your projections. And the other thing which you mentioned about, India is now only 1/3 of the world's per capita energy consumption. There's so much more we could consume. At the same, like Rishika said, there's so many confusing narratives. The Prime Minister is talking about environment-friendly lifestyles. I mean, is that the path we want to take, where we want to consume as much as the West and the way they've colonized the entire carbon space? I mean, we don't want to go that way, right? Because we have such a huge population and so much dependence.
And Mr. Batra, both questions. Question of dispossession, question of, energy use, consumption. Who was there? Nevedita was there, and then I had Jayanto, and then I have two hands at the back. I'm just going to collect I'll ask the panelists to collect all the questions, because then I can get you to answer them. Yes, Nevedita.
Yeah, I'm Nevedita from INS. A question for Mr. Batra. You spoke about the peak being met largely with solar because of the agriculture pumps, right? Can this be similarly applicable for the urban power guzzler centers where, there are large offices, corporate offices, industries, everything running during the daytime? So why is this not happening?
So why is the peak not happening during the day, even though there is such large users in the day in urban areas? I think Mr. Batra will answer that. Yes, Jayanto, and then I have two hands at the back. Yes.
Thank you, Jayanta Basu from Telegraph. Two quick questions. First is that if we look at the install capacity versus generation, if that ratio, I was just looking at the data, Sunita, you showed. I find that from 2019 to 2030, coal is from 1.3 to 1.6. It's actually improving the consumption point of view. Whereas solar is, or the RE is going from 0.4 to 0.6. My question is that the limit we have? Because in 11 years, with all this technology increasing, we are hardly using, just going from 0.4 times to 0.6. That's the first question. Second is, if we look at the overall RE policy, solar policy, the emphasis is on big ticket industries. What about the rooftop? If we look at the country like Germany, rooftop has been a huge success. Why can't we, if we have to achieve such a huge target that Prime Minister has kind of promised, we have to go for this rooftop, but we don't find any policy push for the rooftop. Thank you.
Very good. Yes, I'll take both of you now. Yes.
Yeah, actually, my question is also related to what Jayanta was saying. There was initially when we were talking about solar, when it was just coming up.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry, Aisha Datta from ET Prime here. Initially, when we were talking about solar, there was one of the very big potentials in solar was decentralization. However, we are still going the same route of utility solar, which has problems of, as Chitrangada said, of dispossession of land, biodiversity issues, etc. Why are we not even focusing on rooftop? In fact, rooftop solar growth rate has reduced. It has stagnated, and policy environment has not been supporting that, and nor has the industry. What is exactly happening? Where's the gap?
Good. Ramesh, yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Ramesh from the Hindu. I report from Anantapur, Andhra Pradesh. So where Greenco is implementing the project, it's a massive hybrid project. I mean, it's a reverse pumping of this thing. But there was another storage project that was to come up near Anantapur, but that has been shelved now. That was lithium battery, 10 megawatt thing was, but there again the conflict is with the land, availability of land. People didn't give land, so that project went back. So how do we address, I mean, when we think of storage, so how do we address this? One, the government has done is they're now leasing out land instead of outright purchase by the persons setting up a plant. So they're leasing out the land for a certain period, and the landholder gets a stake in that yearly rentals or whatever is that. But how do we go forward from here?
Very interesting. I think very interesting questions. So I'm going to start, Aditya, 2 questions addressed to you. Can you take them very short and give quick replies to them?
Okay. So I think when it comes to discoms, as to why discoms are being, I guess until these other alternatives come up, I think we are here to stay with discoms for some time. And they are in deep trouble, and they're caught up in all kinds of political gambles that they play. I was talking to Mr. Batra in the afternoon, asking him about, what is this huge, plan. So the plan to do, feeder separation, so that at least the agriculture sector, which is otherwise a big drag on discoms, is taken away. And some of the, a lot of state governments are actually coming up with ideas about smart metering and things like that, where you don't actually need to have a separate feeder.
I need a short answer.
Yeah, so very short. So we will need to live with discoms until such time that we can actually come up with alternative ways in doing things like grid balancing, load balancing in the grids, etc. So I think, and the fear is because the debts are mounted so quickly and so rapidly, we will need to figure out a viability plan for the discoms, at least in the mid to short term. In the long term, yes, I mean, of course, if there are other ways that we should definitely explore, but for now we have to live with them. On GST, I'm not the right person for this. If there's any other panelists that could take the GST
I think
question.
Sumant actually raised that. So the factual part is GST rates are going up as well as import duties are going up. And I think the question that, Sumant basically alluded to the fact that it's very good that the government of India has a PLI scheme and is also incentivizing domestic manufacturing. But is there a gap between the time when those projects will be up and running and we will have and will that create? And maybe that's the big issue as I see it. When I was trying to read and understand the issues, I could see. But I will let again Sumant and Mr. Batra answer all the questions, including this one on GST, if you want to take it up. And the DISCOM issue as well, if you want to take it
sure.
up. Yes.
Sure. So let me just try to answer a lot of the questions very, very quickly. So on GST, GST has been increased for renewable energy projects from 5% to 12% recently, and that's bumped the cost up by whatever 20-30 paise. So that's now the new reality, and that's why you won't see 199 for some time, because all the costs now have to factor in GST of a much higher level. And that's a conscious decision that the states have taken. They're the ones that through the DISCOMs have to pay for the power, and they're the ones who will also get the tax benefit from the GST. So it's a decision, a policy decision on their part, so one can't do much about that. Now, as far as a couple of other questions were concerned on land and on rooftop. So let me address both of those. On land, whatever land we buy is not through the land acquisition process where people have to sell to us involuntarily. We only buy from those people who are willing to sell land to us voluntarily. And obviously, therefore, we require 100% acceptance for us to be able to purchase the land. And going forward, we are also finding that leasing land is becoming more common. So we're not actually buying land in a number of cases now, we're just leasing the land, which for 25, 30 years, and then it sort of goes back to the original landowner. And we do look at issues around whether there are any people that we might be displacing and so on. But as I said, in most cases, because we buy it on a fully voluntary basis, those issues usually are not there in our projects. So I would say, as far as that is really my answer to the land question. So there's nothing forced about it. As I said, it's all voluntary. The second issue on the rooftop part is that, unlike Germany or other countries in the West, in those countries, retail tariffs are higher than tariffs for commercial or industrial customers. And therefore, for a retail consumer, it makes eminent sense for them to have rooftop installations because it's cheaper for them. In India, it's just the reverse. Unfortunately, retail customers are heavily subsidized, and therefore they have no real economic incentive to set up anything on their rooftop and end up paying for it fully because it's not economically viable for them. And so, we tried to do a rooftop business, not to the retail aspect, but really looking more at commercial and industrial customers. And it's a very small business opportunity. I mean, after 5 years of trying in that business, we got to about 120, 130 megawatts of installed capacity. Now, purely from a effectiveness of effort, we can do one single solar project of 300 megawatts. And that we can do we can do many of those over a 1 or 2 year period. So just bang for the buck as far as effort is concerned. The rooftop business is a very difficult business and does not give you the same megawatts installed as you can do on the ground mounted side. And that is why the rooftop business is not really taking off, because the business model is just not there for customers and for corporates, and also from the standpoint that you can do more on a ground mounted basis.
But Sumant, you don't see land availability therefore as a constraint? Because I think that's really been one of the big issues why people have thought rooftop or other ways will help us to scale up.
So rooftop is not really something that is going to add huge megawatts. So if you really want to solve the problem, the carbon emissions problem, then rooftop is an interesting part of that solution, but it's by no means going to be driving that solution, right? And there is no reason why you shouldn't do it, of course. But as I said, the business model is just not there at this point in time. See, land per se in India is not a problem. You have enough land in the barren parts of Rajasthan where you can set up solar capacity to service all of India in terms of our total demand requirement. the issue is not so much land, the issue is transmission infrastructure. Can you build enough transmission infrastructure that will take the power away from there into other parts of the country and connect from there into south, west, north, east? So it's not a land issue, it's a transmission issue, actually. The land is there. Plus, by the way, in wind, right now we are, there are parts of Kutch which the Gujarat government right now is not giving us access to, unfortunately, because their view is, this is our land, why should I let power be produced here to supply to Bihar or Tamil Nadu or somewhere else? Right? It's our land. We want to use it for ourselves. So, if they don't take that view, there is a lot of land for wind available in Gujarat as well. Plus, you can also go offshore wind as well eventually. So land is never going to be a constraining factor. Plus, you can put floating solar on reservoirs as well. And you have tremendous amount of reservoir capacity. You can prevent evaporation of water as well. It's of course a little bit more expensive, but at this point, even that is cheaper than coal-based power. So therefore, land to me is not a constraining factor. The constraint is really transmission and a little bit extra cost of going offshore and floating solar, for example.
Interesting. Mr. Batra.
There is no such thing as barren land, though. I just want to push back on that. And even Kutch supports a lot of life and biodiversity. And we're already seeing the issue of
The bustard, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think, okay. I mean, I'm going to wrap up on this. So
Sunita, I need to head out. So
I know, Suman. I think, Suman, what you're getting, just you're getting a little bit of a pushback from this group here saying land is an issue, land has biodiversity, land has other uses.
Of course
so as a developer, I think you will, but you have pointed to the fact that there is offshore, there are other approaches. But I think land for solar will be an issue that I'm sure as a developer you will accept.
Just 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds. I think just because we're going away. You mentioned about that, you mentioned the business proposition. I understand that completely. But my point is exactly that. Why can't be there the government push, policy push for the business to grow on the solar sector? I was just checking the Germany data. They are contributing hugely to Germany's overall potential. So I understand the business is not there right now because the government push is not there. That exactly was my question, why the government push was not there.
Because they're able to get the same number of megawatts in ground mounted.
You have to come back here. There is so much excitement in this room. Yes, please. You have certainly provoked a lot of questions. Yes. Sorry, Mr. Batra. I will take this. Mr. Batra.
Also, I think my question was more along the lines of the policy environment, in fact, because as you mentioned that one of the big problems is transmission lines. How are you going to transmit even if you produce it in Rajasthan, produce it for the entire country, how are you going to transmit it to Sundarbans? Is it not more cost effective to have sustainable off-grid solutions in places which are not fully connected yet? Then depending on the same discoms and the same transmission systems which have been causing us losses for a long time, at least from the government side.
I know you have to leave.
We can debate all this for a long period of time, Sunita. I think, as you said, we should do it another time. Meanwhile, let me also log off because unfortunately we've sort of overshot the time by a bit.
I know.
But look, I'm happy to engage with all of the people there. Please do reach out to us. Of course, you can do so through CSE. And we're happy to get together at any other occasion and have a more deeper conversation about this.
No, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
This has been an issue that you and I have also engaged on for years now. So I did not provoke anyone here, but thank you very much. For,
thank you all so much.
And we will look forward to a continued. Mr. Batra, I'm going to ask you but thank you, Sumant. I know you have to log off. Go ahead. Thank you. We'll be in touch. Mr. Batra, I'm going to give you, because we are really now stretched for time. Everyone is going to have to eat very quickly today. Okay, 2 o'clock you have to be, 3 o'clock you have to be back here, huh? And Mr. Munjal and others all are on tight schedules. So I'm sorry. So it's going to be tight. Huh?
So should I?
I'll come back. Evening. We're all together over the bonfire. Mr. Batra is also there. We will share everything. I have some stories to tell you on rooftop solar. And I'm dying to tell you that, but I will tell you that in the evening.
So should I address the 4 questions 4 issues which are raised?
Mr. Batra, maybe as you're there in the evening, I'm going to ask you to just wait because we are really stretched for time. If that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, so 3 to 6, I'm conducting a session.
ये 7 बजे होगा. ठीक है. आपने questions note कर लिए. So the land issue, important. Okay.
Discoms.
Then the discom issue, very important. Why are we, if they're opting out, what is the problem?
Rooftop
Then the
solar.
shifting to, and then rooftop solar.
The peak shifting.
The peak shifting, but most importantly, I think the rooftop solar. What can we do to accelerate that?
Right, right.
So I'm going to actually start the evening with you on this. Okay. Okay, तो लिख लीजिए इसके अंदर.
one more issue.
आप ये notes लेके आइएगा, please.
Hello.
How will that be? So we're going to start with you, and then Roxy, I'm going to collect some questions for you. So we will then